He went to Rojava to fight ISIS.
Yeah.
Sorry, he didn't go there to fight. It's what he ended up doing.
Yeah.
You want me to tell that little story? It's a fun little anecdote.
It's a good one.
So I picked up Libbitcoin to have a Bitcoin stack for something that I was working at the time that I decided not to complete, and I continued. So I did this for about a year. I'd done a couple startup companies previously, and this is what I wanted to do. But I decided just to keep working on Libbitcoin after I I decided it wasn't going to be worth making this thing I was trying to make. So a couple years on Bitcoin, I'd started to kind of hit my stride and like understand how Libbitcoin worked, how Bitcoin worked, with a lot of patience from Amir. He was great. And one of the first things I did in the very beginning, I got interested in Bitcoin. I immediately went to the software and I looked at Satoshi software. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. I was an experienced C developer, C++ developer, and I was aghast. I was like, none of it made any sense to me. And so I started looking around and I found it was an early end Bitcoin thing. There was some Java stuff that I couldn't find anything that I really liked, but I found Libbitcoin and it wasn't complete, but what I saw I liked. So I went to, I didn't want to work on this thing and take a dependency on it, taking a dependency on anything is a very big commitment, which I learned long ago. So I wanted to meet who was running who was doing this thing. And I sent Amir a couple emails, got no response. And I watched a couple videos. I'm like, this guy's out there, right? And this is what he was pushing was what I wanted. It wasn't necessarily me, but that was why I was doing this. And so I decided I wanted to meet him, but he wouldn't answer an email. So I was trolling through the Libbitcoin mailing list, which is not a really high volume list. And I see the name of one of my fraternity brothers from college, right? Like just out of the blue. And I happened to live in Seattle at the time because I had sold my company to Microsoft. And so I just sent an email off to this guy. Turns out he was living in Seattle at the time. He just sold his company to SAIC, which was kind of a similar deal. And I said, hey, how do you know Amir? How do you know this thing? And I hadn't talked to him in like 20 years. I don't know. So I got in touch with him. We stayed in touch after that. So he was kind of a spooky guy. Like he had barbecue with Admiral Poindexter and that kind of stuff. He sold a security company to the NSA. So and he was a computer science PhD from Rensselaer, where I went to school, and fraternity brother. So I trust him. I knew him for a long time. So I would pick his brain on this stuff to kind of understand the state of the art. But turned out it was completely unrelated to Bitcoin. He had written some Python twister stuff that Amir used in his gambling software, just totally coincidentally. So they knew each other from this, and he was poking around at Libbitcoin. And so he sent Amir an email. Amir answered him, and I went out to Barcelona, north of Barcelona, to meet Amir in Califu, which was a kind of an anarchist hack space that he was living in at the time. And I spent a night in his bed and woke up the next morning, and he was hacking all through the night with his buddy, with some wood stove fireplace and everything. And that's how I met him. I got to know him. So ever since then, I've been working on the project. Like I said, I shut down the thing I was working on. I decided just to work on Libbitcoin. Why? I don't know. I don't. So I've never taken a nickel to work on it. Not for anything. Not to speak. Nothing. I've paid other people a pretty good amount of money to work on Libbitcoin, and I've raised money for other people to work on Libbitcoin. To me, this is just what I want to do, and I can afford to do it because I've had several past lives. So at some point, I was getting to the point where I was starting to do a lot of the development in Bitcoin, in Libbitcoin. And Amir was starting to pull back, and I didn't really know what was going on, but he was talking a lot about Syria and what was going on and everything. And then all of a sudden he tells me he's going to be silent for a while. And I just knew, I knew he's going out there, right? Said, all right, and then months later I get an email and get an update, and the whole, it's all public history at that, after this, he comes back and everything. But I learned what happened was, he went out there to talk to the new budding country about Bitcoin as a kind of a currency so they were moving cash to Turkey and back, and just a very complex, difficult process. And so that's what he went there to do. Now, Amir is a very interesting guy. He speaks Esperanto. Nobody speaks Esperanto. Why would he even bother to learn Esperanto? But he speaks Esperanto, right? And several other languages. But he didn't speak Kurdish. So he goes there, doesn't speak the language. He gets on a boat, goes down some, I don't know, Euphrates or something. He's going down some river, and they put a bag over his head. They took him to the middle of the night, and he shows up at the place, and he's like, I want to. They don't know what he's talking about, so they put a gun in his hand, and they sent him out to basically the front lines. ISIS is like a mile away, and they're shooting at each other for like a year before he learns the language. So I think his squad leader got killed, which was a woman that shelled next door to him and stuff. But he was not, it's kind of distant, long-range shooting. So to me, it really reminded me of George Orwell in Ode to Catalonia. If you ever read that book, most people get through Animal Farm or 1984, but go back and read Ode to Catalonia. This is where he comes from, right? He had written before this, he wrote after this, but this is where Orwell really comes from. And he goes to Spain to fight in the Spanish Civil War as a socialist. Ends up with the anarchists who are fighting alongside the communists, who are fighting the fascists, and they end up fighting each other, and it's all this hypocrisy and stuff. And he's shooting long range at the enemy on mountaintop. It just made me think of Amir, right? He just goes here, it's a big goat rope, he's shooting long range at these guys, people getting killed, and nothing's really Anyway, so he eventually learns the language. He then makes it into the capital area, talks to the people. They come up with some kind of plan, and he comes back, and he gets an ankle bracelet, and jerked around by the Brits for a while, but he's okay. And then he gave some speeches, which you can go watch. So that's how I ended up kind of taking over Libbitcoin. Because by the time he got back and he got through all that, and he had a kind of a different focus, he was still made a few contributions, but he's like, this is your thing, because by that time I was really aggressively moving forward with what we were doing.
Yeah, when we have Bitcoiners now sort of simping for Sailor to raise more money through a credit facility to buy more Bitcoin, it reminds me of the meme where it's like the chicken and the T-Rex is in the clouds saying, "Remember who you are." Our Bitcoiners, when they were anarchists that went to go fight a war, they put a project down. They started out, they coded something, super combative or contentious, like an alternative implementation against Satoshi's wishes. It's quite a different era, but I think it is, important to remember who laid a lot of the groundwork for what we have today.